Hello there. On the afternoon of March the 1st, 2009, Miss Wu, a middle-aged woman, was driving back to her hometown with her 7-year-old grandson after finishing work in the city. They were traveling on a highway that passed through the hillside of Xinjiang village, where the Sichuan buffaloes were grazing. As they were driving from the foot of the hill, the child suddenly said he needed to urinate, so Miss Wu stopped the car to find a place for him. Since it was a highway that crossed the hillside, one side was a high hill and the other side was a gentle slope. Miss Wu took her grandson to the lower side where there were abundant trees and bushes to attend to his needs. While they were standing near the road barrier looking down the slope, Miss Wu noticed something red standing out against the ground and dry leaves. Upon closer inspection, she realized it looked like a person lying at an angle, legs bent up towards the neck and wrapped in a red cloth. The head was tilted downward towards the slope, while the legs were higher up, with one arm stretched above the head and the hand resting on long hair. This lying position was highly unusual, and she thought that it seemed like an accident had happened to that person. The highway was considerably higher than the slope below, with a distance of over 10 meters from the road barrier to the woman lying there. Due to the significant distance from the highway, Miss Wu felt uncertain. She even squinted her eyes several times to get a better look and hoped it was just a plastic mannequin. When the 7-year-old child saw his grandmother hesitating and looking fearful, he followed her gaze and told her that it seemed there was a woman sleeping down there right next to a few tree roots. Hearing the child's words, Miss Wu became terrified and quickly called the police. The police in Dazhou City, Sichuan province, received the report and immediately went to Xinjiang village, quickly sealing off the crime scene. They found the body of a young woman lying on the slope of the highway. This location was relatively secluded, despite the heavy traffic on the road above, as there were no houses or pathways below and hardly anyone passed by. There were no signs of a fierce struggle at the crime scene, although a heavy rain had occurred earlier, erasing some important traces on the ground. Only a footprint of a man and few footprints near the victim remained. About 60 centimeters away from the victim was a woman's synthetic leather jacket, relatively new and rolled up with a black color. There were tire marks on the dry leaves deeply pressed into the ground, clearly indicating that a vehicle had turned around and left the scene heading towards Dazhou City. Based on these findings, and the absence of the victim's shoes at the crime scene, the police determined that it was a dumping site rather than the place where the crime had been committed. The victim was wearing a long-sleeved shirt and long pants, but no coat, despite the lingering cold weather, while the coat was found discarded near the body. The victim was a young woman approximately 20 years old, about 1.6 meters tall, with long hair on the forehead showing a bruise from a collision. There was a piece of red fabric rolled up on her neck. This was a long piece of red fabric, not a scarf, as Miss Wu initially thought. The cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation, indicating strangulation. These are the preliminary pieces of information that the police collected at the crime scene. Subsequently, the forensic report revealed that the female victim was approximately 22 to 25 years old, around 1.62 meters tall, and had a few minor bruises on her body. The victim had died about 38 hours before the discovery of the body, placing the exact time of death on the night of February 27th. The red fabric was still wrapped around the victim's neck when the body was discovered. The victim's face and lips were swollen, the tongue protruded. There was froth in the mouth. Both eyes were bloodshot and bleeding. There were multiple horizontal and evenly spaced marks on the neck, causing bruising across the skin. All these signs indicated that the victim had been strangled to death. Prior to death, the victim had engaged in consensual sexual intercourse and there were no signs of violent assault. Although there were some bruises on the body, if they were restraint marks, they would usually appear in locations such as the front thighs, shins, or wrists. However, the victim only had one bleeding wound on the forehead and one on the back of the neck. These marks were likely caused by the victim struggling and hitting something while being strangled by the assailant. At the forensic crime scene, a semen sample was collected for DNA testing, but when compared to the national database, no matches were found. This indicates that the DNA data of this man has not been entered into the national database. However, another issue is that certain substances found in regular condoms were also present in the victim's body, indicating that a condom was used during sexual intercourse. From the victim's fingernails, forensic doctors obtained skin fragments and blood for DNA testing, but the results belonged to another man. This result did not match the previous semen sample and was also not found in the national database. So is the DNA sample from the semen or the DNA sample from the man she resisted scratching the evidence of the perpetrator in this case? Or could this be a case of two murderers? Initially, the police checked the camera at the toll booth near the hill, but as it was a highway, the traffic of cars passing through here was high day and night. and there was only one camera. During the investigation, the police checked over 200 cars of the same type as the tire tracks left at the crime scene to narrow down the suspects. They also searched for other trace evidence at the crime scene, but found no information related to the victim's identity. It appears that the victim's wallet and phone were also taken. To determine the victim's identity as soon as possible, the police photographed all the evidence at the crime scene, such as clothing, shoes, and outer jackets, and released personal identifying characteristics for public notification. There are many details in this case that make it very complex and require extensive reasoning. Figuring out the most reasonable scenario for the situation the victim encountered is what is giving the investigators a headache in these cases. According to the experience of the investigating police, there is a famous saying, "Discard far, bury near." This means that if the murderer disposes of the body, they will choose a location in a remote and secluded place far from the perpetrator and the victim's residence, especially with few people passing by. Discarding the body quickly requires less effort, but after a short period of time, it can be easily discovered as there is no cover for the corpse. Therefore, it is necessary to find a location that is far away. If the body is discovered early, there will be no acquaintances to easily recognize the victim. Bury near means that the perpetrator will choose a location not too far away. Firstly, because digging a grave takes a lot of time and must ensure that it is not discovered. In addition, they need to be familiar with the location, knowing when people pass by and when they don't. Secondly, it is convenient to monitor the news about that area, such as any changes in construction or excavation. This is the experience drawn from the cases of investigators, and they believe that it is highly likely that the living area of the perpetrator is far from the area where the body was found, because this is a case of discarding the body with no other behavior to conceal the corpse. For cases of body disposal like this one, once the victim's identity is determined, it can be considered a successful case in solving half of the crime. After finding the victim's identity, the police will narrow down the social relationships and from there search for any conflicts that could lead to the motive for the murder. The search for the identity of the victim finally yielded results. A few days later, a middle-aged couple came to report that their daughter had been missing for several days. The physical characteristics and personal belongings matched those of the person found murdered in the search notice. They had no idea their daughter was missing until they read the notice and immediately called their son-in-law. Upon learning that their daughter had left the apartment they were staying in a few days ago, they hurriedly went to the police station to report and identify her. When the police showed the couple the crime scene photo, they found the victim's face appeared unfamiliar and frighteningly distorted, making them uncertain if it was their daughter. However, upon closely examining the identifying features, this woman burst into tears upon recognizing her daughter from a scar on the victim's arm. The victim was identified as Hali, a 25-year-old woman who was beautiful and youthful. She had been married for 2 years and was currently living with her husband. The couple questioned why Hali had been missing for several days without her husband reporting it to the police. Hali's biological parents came to report the case, while her husband was the first to discover her disappearance. His name was Wei Shu Huang, and the couple had no children. They had a strained relationship and frequently argued. Li had proposed divorce several times, but Huang disagreed. The main reason was that the condominium they owned was purchased jointly, but all the money spent on it belonged to Huang. If they divorced, they would have to divide the assets in half, so Huang was unwilling to agree and tried to maintain the relationship. It was evident that he had conflicts with the victim both emotionally and financially. Furthermore, he told the police that on the evening of the incident, the couple continued to argue about divorce and money. Frustrated, Huang made an appointment with a group of friends at another person's house, and the whole group drank alcohol throughout the night. He also mentioned that Hali had a complicated social circle, having many male friends, and even after marriage, she had cheated on her husband. He was well aware of her extramarital relationship with a man named Chen Yuan Tuen. Occasionally, Li would leave home for a few days to go out, so her disappearance did not surprise her husband, and he did not report it to the police for that reason. After investigating Huang's activities, the police confirmed that he had walked to a friend's house in a nearby apartment, and the video footage showed him entering and leaving the building until the next morning. This drinking group consisted of 4 people, and when the police interviewed them separately, all of their testimonies matched perfectly. That night, after playing cards, they stayed overnight, and the host went out to buy breakfast to invite everyone to eat together before leaving one by one. Therefore, the police temporarily removed Wei Shu Huang from the list of suspects due to a lack of direct evidence of his involvement in the crime. Instead, the police decided to investigate Chen Yuan Tuen, a 33-year-old man who had an extramarital relationship with Hali and was her former boyfriend. Although the two had broken up before they continued to communicate regularly after Li married her current husband. When the police went to Tuen's house to inquire, he claimed that he had not met Holly in the past week. Before the incident, Tuen had sent text messages to arrange a meeting with Lee, but they didn't meet. He said he was alone at home that evening, but there was no evidence of any criminal activity. During the interviews with some of Lee's friends, they revealed that she often borrowed money from each of them but often forgot to repay, causing annoyance to many people. Lee was also known to lie in order to borrow money and always benefited more in her relationships. However, these were only minor conflicts in social relationships, and the borrowing amounts were not significant enough to cause any prominent disputes with anyone. The police did not find any new leads during the investigation of the suspicious individuals. At this point, the police were considering who would benefit the most if Holly were to die, possibly her husband, due to the disputed value of the house. Therefore, they secretly conducted surveillance to collect DNA samples from Holly's husband and her lover. The DNA results revealed that the DNA samples from the victim's skin fragments and blood under her fingernails belonged to Weishu Huang, while the semen sample belonged to Chen Yuen Tuen. The police continued to investigate Huang once again, and this time they noticed that his hands had some scratches that had already dried up. When asked about the cause, he explained that he had argued with his wife that evening about her desire for a divorce and splitting the house. Weishu Huang made it clear to Holly that the money used to buy the house belonged to him and that there was still a debt remaining. Since he had purchased the house on his own and the two of them did not have any children together, he insisted that if she wanted a divorce, she would have to accept leaving. Holly became angry and attacked him, causing the injuries. After the intense argument, he left the house and went to his friend's place as mentioned before. However, he didn't have clear evidence of any external wrongdoing with multiple witnesses. At this point, the police checked Huang's mobile phone, communication history, and bank account. They discovered that a few days before Holly's death, he had frequent contact with a man through several phone calls and had transferred 50,000 yuan to that person. Currently, the police suspected that he had planned to hire someone to kill his wife in order to avoid the property dispute. Therefore, on that night, he intentionally argued with his wife and then left to drink with his friend to create an alibi for not being at home. When the police questioned Weishu Huang about this money, he stated that it was the amount he paid to settle a debt after borrowing money to buy the house. Every time he gathered enough money, he immediately transferred it to the creditor. Following that, the police verified that these two individuals indeed had a lending relationship, and Weishu Huang was gradually repaying the debt. Furthermore, the man in question was an elderly person with a disabled hand. Thus, after further investigation, Huang was eliminated from the list of suspects. Subsequently, another group of police officers went to Chen Yuen Tuen's house and informed him that they knew he had lied because they found his semen sample in the victim's body. At this point, Chen Yuen Tuen admitted that they had arranged to meet and had sexual relations at his house, after which Holly took a taxi and left. Since Holly was murdered, the police also began to suspect themselves. Due to the fear of being suspected, Tuen lied and claimed that he did not meet Holly on the night of the crime. The police examined Chen Yuen Tuen's car but found no bloodstains. The car type and tire tracks did not match those at the crime scene. Despite conducting investigations using various methods, the police could not identify any suspects based on the victim's social relationships. Therefore, they decided to focus on reinvestigating the locations where the perpetrator could have dumped the body based on the traces found on the victim's body. The police discovered that the victim had been assaulted before her death, but her clothes were not heavily torn, and she only had minor injuries on her neck. If a person had two wounds on opposite sides like that, it indicated that the assault may have occurred in a confined space such as a car. Moreover, the police remembered that the victim was only wearing a t-shirt and long pants, while a black fake leather jacket belonging to the victim was found at the crime scene. This indicated that the victim was not wearing a jacket when she died. The time of death was after 11 p.m. on February 27th. Although it was quite cold that evening, it would make sense if Lee was sitting in the car and took off her jacket. The tire tracks left at the crime scene clearly indicated that this car could be the crime scene, and Chen Yuen Tuen also mentioned that Holly took a taxi to leave after meeting him. Therefore, it was possible that Holly was killed in a taxi. Furthermore, the police discovered a piece of red fabric wrapped around the victim's neck, and this red fabric was not ordinary. Based on the investigation, this red fabric was usually used by professional boxers or athletes during training, and they would tie it around their hand while boxing. Based on this information, the police speculated that the suspect could be a taxi driver who enjoyed boxing and was a physically fit man. With these characteristics in mind, the police started searching for taxis that matched the vehicle type and the traces left at the crime scene, including both company-owned taxis and independent ones. The police quickly gathered information about the taxi driver's routes from the dispatchers through GPS on the night of February 27th. The investigators ruled out vehicles that did not have matching routes with the area where the murder victims were found. However, for individual taxi drivers without GPS tracking in their cars determining their routes for that night could only rely on their testimonies. The case reached a deadlock until a taxi driver named Bang Hai suddenly sold his car and opened a fruit shop right after the police took his statement. While it was not unusual for him to seek a better job, the timing was suspicious, coinciding with the police investigation. This caught the attention of the police. Bang Hai, a 35-year-old local taxi driver, was known to be an amateur boxer and often frequented gyms after work hours. Based on multiple pieces of evidence that matched the suspect's profile, the police secretly monitored Bang Hai and individuals connected to him. They discovered that the mobile phone of Bang Hai's mother-in-law was the same phone used by the victim Ha Li when she was alive. With this evidence, the police quickly identified Bang Hai as the murderer. He was physically fit and an amateur boxer. Therefore, the police carefully planned to apprehend him. After successfully surrounding him, the police obtained compelling evidence, and Bang Hai quickly confessed. He claimed that he had never met the victim before. On the evening of February 7th, while Bang Hai was driving through a neighborhood, Ha Li hailed his taxi and asked to be taken to Lianhua Lake. However, as they approached the destination, Li suddenly said she had no money and proposed paying with her body. Bang Hai agreed immediately, and they stopped at a nearby store for Li to purchase condoms. The surveillance camera at the store captured this image at 9:50. They then continued driving onto the highway to find a secluded spot and came across a road leading downhill. There were no houses or paved roads here, so there was no traffic. The two seemed to enjoy each other's company, but after finishing, Li demanded 2,000 yuan from Hai. Hai stated that he didn't have that amount of money to give her, but she threatened to accuse him of rape if he couldn't provide it. Bang Hai claimed that he had already provided the service for free, so he couldn't give her the money. Li immediately started shouting, and Hai, in a panic, covered her mouth with his hand. However, Li continued to struggle, creating a chaotic situation. Caught off guard, Bang Hai hastily grabbed a fabric strap from the glove compartment and strangled the victim, causing her to lose consciousness. During the struggle, the victim flailed and hit her head on the seat, resulting in injuries to her forehead and neck. When he realized that Li had died, Bang Hai pulled her body out of the car and threw it into a nearby field. He then saw Li's black jacket still on the back seat and threw it out before driving away. Life always presents unexpected and extraordinary situations like this, so we need to be more cautious. Solving a case that starts with finding the identity of the victim and establishing a connection between the perpetrator and the victim who had no prior acquaintance but were involved in a random conflict like this case is very challenging. However, in the end, the perpetrator was eventually discovered due to a detail that startled him. He had sold the car and changed his occupation, but he couldn't escape. Regarding the issue of Ha Li's safety and behavior on that evening, it cannot be stated with certainty because it is only the testimony of the perpetrator. Although it seems logical and reasonable, it still needs to be examined. However, one thing is certain: Ha Li was willing to get in the car with a stranger and offered to pay using her body instead of paying for the ride. These are reliable details, and Ha Li was not coerced because she had previously gotten out of the car to buy condoms at a store. If it were a dangerous situation, she could have sought help at that time, and moreover, medical professionals have determined it was consensual intercourse. This case shows that women are inherently vulnerable, so they should not travel alone with strangers and should avoid secluded places to ensure their safety. How do you feel about today's case? Leave a comment so we can discuss, and if you liked it, don't hesitate to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support us. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.